With the Tour de France Unchained starting on June 8th, I wanted to make a video where I talk about the things which I really hope are going to be included in this upcoming series. I really hope that all these things are going to be included to try and really provide a comprehensive view as to how great the 2022 Tour de France really was, starting with the fact that Tadej Pogačar going into this race had won the 2021 and 2020 editions, and how important that was, with the fact that he beat Jumbo-Visma both of those times, and sort of the battle between Tadej Pogačar and Jumbo-Visma, and how Pogačar's Slovenian and Roglic is Slovenian, but how Vingegaard really stepped up to the plate in 2021. I think these are all really important things to try and set the narrative as to the two sides of this big GC battle, and that needs to be made really clear, I think, early on. And also sort of a heartbreaker, especially of the 2020 edition, where Pogačar won on the TT on the second to last day up La Planche de Belleville ahead of Roglic, which was quite like an emotional day for Jumbo-Visma especially. They also will be following 8 teams. I think we need to make this pretty clear as to who these 8 teams are pretty early on, because I always feel like saying like Drive to Survive, you sort of just ping around people and you're not really too sure who they're kind of covering on each time. But I think it's going to be important to try and be sure to state which 8 teams there are. There are some teams which aren't going to be followed, which might limit our access to some kind of moments, like Hugo Hull's win, for example. So we'll have to wait and see whether they include some of the things like that, but I'll cover those moments kind of anyway later on in this video. Talk about how the 2022 Tour de France actually started in Denmark, and how the Tour de France has this ability to start races in different parts of the world, and how it was Denmark this time round, and the significance of starting in different countries, and how those have produced really good racing in the past. And then also explain why then Magnus Cort Nielsen, who is Danish, went into the breakaways and won the polka dot jersey in those opening stages, and why a rider would want to go into the breakaway. Also the importance of stage 1, the time trial, which was a wet one, and how the yellow jersey is up for grabs for the person who wins that stage, obviously, and why the yellow jersey is so significant to the sport of cycling in terms of its history and its prestige, just generally why people care about winning the Tour de France. Also about, because of course Jakobsen wins a stage, I want them to include the history of Jakobsen crashing in the Tour of Polonia, and why his win at the Tour de France was so significant from a comeback perspective, and also how he was sprinting against Groenewegen, who was the person who was also involved in that Tour of Polonia crash. So really dive into Jakobsen's comeback and why his win at the Tour was such an amazing feat for him to be able to do, considering that he was in a really bad state after that crash. And then further go on to Wout van Aert, because of course he finished very high up in all the sprints, but then when he won in Calais, of course I want them to try and go back, if they are allowed to. I think they should be able to, because it's also run by the ASO, but talk about how Jumbo-Visma basically did the same thing in Paris-Nice earlier that year, and sort of show almost a side-by-side comparison, because I've seen that quite a few times on YouTube, and I think it'd be a shame for them to miss out on something like that. And then of course the cobbled stage, talk about the controversy of how people think that, you know, cobbles are a good thing or not a good thing in a Grand Tour. Then also talk about how Simon Clark, the person who won that stage, didn't actually have a contract, and therefore why it was so emotional that he won that stage from the breakaway. And then we go into Pogačar wins up La Super Planche de Belleville, and sort of tie that back to his victory in 2020 ahead of Primož Roglic, and talk about just kind of how that was the big first kind of uphill battle that we had, and just kind of show basically like the Pogačar first blow, and then sort of that sets up nicely as to how Jumbo-Visma respond to that later on. Of course they respond to it at like stage 11, when they go up like the Galibier and the Col de Glanon and the Telegraph and stuff like that, and really outline just how amazing that stage was. Not just because I was there at the side of the road and, you know, maybe I'm biased to think of it was so amazing because I was there, but it was a really good stage. Talk about how crazy, like the history of climbs like the Galibier, like the Telegraph, eventually getting onto Alpe d'Huez, which I'll talk about in a second, and also how Pogačar has never really been cracked before, but Jumbo-Visma managed to do it this time round, and how they did it, and the sacrifice of Roglic up the Galibier, well, the sacrifice, but like the teamwork of Roglic and Jonas and Wout van Aert being in the breakaway, and just how significant that stage was in actual Tour de France history, because it was an absolute cracker of a stage. And then, like I said, Alpe d'Huez, of course, the day after was where Pidcock won up there, and they need to show that descent off of the Galibier, because if they don't, it's going to be an absolute, like, there's no point in even doing the whole series, because that descent down the Galibier by Pidcock was just beautiful. And they just need to also show like Alpe d'Huez and why that's such an iconic climb, the crazy crowds, how people camp out days beforehand. I think that'd be a really cool aspect to show from a fan's perspective as well. After that, you know, there's some stages which were won by, like, up to Monde by Michael Matthews, but Jayco aren't one of the teams, and neither are Israel, who have, of course, Hugo Houle and his stage victory. Even though Israel, Premier Tech aren't the team, so they might not be included, like Simon Clark's victory or Hugo Houle's, I really hope they cover it, just because Hugo Houle and his history with his brother Pierrick, who was unfortunately killed in 2012 by a hit and run, I think it was arguably one of the best story arcs in the whole tour that I've ever seen, and I think it was just such a heartwarming moment, and I think it would be fantastic for people new to the sport to see just how important a stage win is at the Tour de France for a rider, and how that could be an absolute career-defining moment. Then after that, we've got Pogačar, who, of course, he won up the Pelagud, but then also show how brutal it can be. He had that small crash where Jonas waited up for him and they did a little fist bump and stuff. I think it'll be, you know, they have to include that as well, just because it really shows the camaraderie between Jonas and Pogačar and the respect that they have as competitors, and outline how that is a thing in cycling. It's not all just kind of people absolutely hell-bent on winning. There is a very human aspect to it, and show that side of the sport as well. Jonas then goes and puts more time into Pogačar up the Haute with the help of Wout van Aert, and just how significant and, you know, how just amazing that performance was by Wout van Aert on that day to still finish in third place. And then lastly, round up with the Champs-Élysées, where of course Jasper Philipsen wins, but they could do a bit of a roll call of other victors on the Champs-Élysées and have a bit of a kind of throwback, a bit of a almost like a flashback to previous wins by the likes of Greipel and Cavendish and other people like that. I think that would be a fantastic way to sort of round out the series. But those are my points as to what I hope is included in the Tour de France Unchained. Of course, it is, like I said, it's starting on the 8th of June. Put down in the comments down below, is there anything which I missed? Is there anything which you think they should definitely be including in this Tour de France Unchained? Of course, click the subscribe button, because I'm going to be doing a episode by episode breakdown when they come out. And of course, that will be leading us up nicely into the Tour de France. So very excited about this time of year. And all that is left to say is to stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!